Welcome to Content Disrupted, bold takes on brand marketing. I'm your host, Casey Noble, and together we'll explore what it takes to excel in brand marketing at one of the most exciting and disruptive times in industry history. All right, so welcome back to Content Disrupted. Joining us today is brilliant B2B marketing expert, Ardath Albee. She's the CEO of Marketing Interactions, a firm that specializes in creating buyer personas and digital marketing strategies for B2B companies with complex sales. She spent 4 years on the 50 most influential people in sales and lead management list. She's a frequent speaker, and she's the author of 2 books, E-Marketing Strategies for the Complex Sale and Digital Relevance. And I actually have my copy of Digital Relevance over here next to me on the bookshelf. So happy to dive into that as well. It's a brilliant book. I encourage folks to check it out for sure. Ardath, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Well, thanks so much, Casey. It's great to be here.
So I am so excited to have you on. You're a thought leader who really approaches strategy, I feel like, with such intellectual rigor and fresh insight. Every time I read something you've written, I'm just one of those people, nodding my head. It's like, yes, she nailed it. That's exactly how it is. So it's so exciting to get to pick your brain a little bit. But before we dive into B2B marketing strategy, I would love if you could, just for the benefit of our listeners, share a little bit about your professional journey and how you developed your expertise in B2B marketing.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm not a marketer by training. I didn't go to school for it. But all the way back in the year 2000, I was the only non-techie in a tech company. Think first ever iteration of like marketing automation and website software that marketers could run themselves. And if you think back to 2000, companies basically had brochures, and they took their brochures and put them online and said, okay, we're now digital. No. And so our customers were saying, well, nothing's changed. We're not seeing any great value from this. And of course, way back in the day, it was expensive custom installs and, that kind of thing. We didn't have SaaS. And so I started as a writer, and I have a degree in English literature as well as business. And so I started looking at their websites, and I thought, oh my God, who wants to read this? So I started helping them revamp their content. And one of my passions is fiction writing. And so I've spent years studying fiction, going to retreats with best-selling authors and learning how to build characters and all of this. And that learning transitioned into, well, who are you talking to? Which became buyer personas. And a lot of that fed into the methodology, because when you think about a fiction book, a novel is about 400 words or 400 pages. It's 100,000 words. You've got to create a character strong enough to stand up through all of that, right? Going on a journey through that whole story. And for a lot of the companies we were doing business with, their sale was a complex one, and their sales cycle could take a year or, at least 8 months, 6 to 8 months, or maybe even longer. And so they needed to be able to tell stories. And so I started working with them. And by 2007, I had enough demand that I chose to leave the tech company and start my consultancy. And I walked into consulting with a whole book of clients, right, that came with me. And so that was fabulous. And it was kind of like one of those right place, right time moments that, you get once in a lifetime, and just happened to be mine. And it's been a blast ever since. But I think, interestingly, I've been consulting for, let me think about this now, 2007 to 13, 14 years, when one of my clients asked me to become their interim VP of marketing. For a while, they were going through a reorg. And so I did that. And they promised a few months, and it ended up being a little over a year, at which time I discovered that I'm really not a corporately employable person. But,
Love that.
But the benefit for me was that I had been doing consulting for a long time, and project-based work where I'd go in and do some of it. Maybe I'd build personas. Sometimes I'd stay on to build the content strategy and help with execution. But a lot of the times I wouldn't. And so my view of the entire marketing organization, was kind of outdated. And so being able to be their VP of marketing and rebuild a team and, get my hands on platforms like, the latest version of HubSpot and 6sense and Salesforce, and see how everything works together, and a variety of other platforms, and follow things all the way through, from creating the foundation to building the strategy to doing the execution to looking at the analytics to, driving revenue, and actually see that all of the work that I had been doing over the years was validated, that it worked, that it actually worked, because, hey, that would be great. And I knew that because my clients, a lot of them, in fact, I hardly have any new clients. They all keep coming back for more, redo our personas. We need a new, content program, whatever. And so it was really fun for me to see that the stuff actually works when you do it well. And so, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I love that connection between, character building and persona building, because I do think the principles are the same. And when you have that sort of, writer bone, that writer instinct, and that innate ability to kind of empathize, I feel like empathy is really the key, and the ability to put yourself truly in someone else's shoes and share a mindset. Unfortunately, we don't have as much control, I guess, over our buyers and who's going to come in and out of the door as we do a character set, right? So I think you've highlighted a lot of those challenges and practical strategies for dealing with that. So I wanted to kind of talk about that too, and kind of what's changed. And, you had written a LinkedIn article. I don't know how long it's been up, but it was fresh and shocking and cool to me. I saw this stat from an Allen agency survey that you highlighted, and it said only 1% of the C-suite decision makers surveyed believed that B2B marketing showed a meaningful understanding of the human experience, which is pretty ouch. I mean, that's a major misalignment. And then you went on to talk about how this was kind of due to a culmination of kind of bad habits in B2B marketing. And you described that as the kiss of beige, which I thought was brilliant. So I would love if you can, for listeners, elaborate on that point, what you meant by the kiss of beige and why that's really a critical issue for B2B companies right now.
Yeah, well, that report shocked the heck out of me too. And so, because we all were working so hard on it, and to think that that's the impression that's
Right.
getting left. And granted, it was a small study, but the thing that stood out for me, which I pointed out in the piece, was it was all C-level, CEOs, CFOs, CMOs, all C-level that had these impressions of B2B marketing. And for me, and I see this a lot, most of my clients are enterprise, which means that everything we create has to go through a review process, and then it has to make it through legal. The kiss of beige to anything is going through legal, but it's this whole thing. I think the point I settled on when I was writing about it is this whole risk aversion thing. We don't want to do anything that's going to upset anybody, and God forbid we drive away a possible customer. And, and there seems to be this refusal to put a stake in the ground and say, we are for this particular set of people, or this product. If we sell a bunch of products, this particular product is really for this set of people, and put a stake in the ground and really speak to those people. It's kind of like, yeah, but what if somebody over here in this other tangential area wants to buy it? We're going to sell it to them. We don't want them to think it doesn't apply to them. And I'm like, but who cares? And, one way to illustrate this is I'm known for persona development and content strategy. I get asked to do all kinds of other things besides that, because they're kind of like, well, if you're good at that, you're going to be good at this other thing too. So, but the problem we have is that it's really hard to talk to everybody and be relevant at the same time, and so it's, maybe you're talking to a director of IT. Well, great. If that director of IT works at an enterprise company, their job description is way different than a director of IT at an SMB or a mid-sized company. The hierarchies are different. The number of hats you wear are different. The specialization is different. What they care about, what they're responsible for, and how their performance is evaluated is different. So it's, and there's a lot of more moving parts in an enterprise company than there is in an SME. You know what I'm saying? So you just can't generalize this stuff. And so one of the things that fascinates me when doing customer interviews and talking to people are the words they use. How do they describe what they think? Because a lot of us internally, we talk amongst our team or whatever, and we've got our own shorthand for how we talk about it. 9 times out of 10 has nothing to do with how our actual buyers talk about or think about the problem they're solving or whatever. And so how can we be relevant if we're making assumptions about them? And I mean, it's as simple as sitting in a meeting talking about, somebody says, well, we need a white paper, and somebody presents a suggestion. Well, we should talk about blah, 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 because, that's going on in the industry. And somebody else pipes up and said, well, heck, I would never read that. Well, who the frick cares? It's not for you. You know what I'm saying to you?
Yeah.
And so unless your target market is you, your role, whatever, in your industry, then it doesn't matter what you think. I saw another report that came out that said, 56% of marketers think their content is really relevant and engaging. And heck, 56% of them also say they read their own content. Well, that should be a sign right there that you messed it up. It's not for you, right? And so, but there's all this political stuff going on with companies and what they think and how they posture and territorialism and the way they relate to their competitors. And we don't want to upset the apple cart. And, if we take this bold stand, then legal's going to have a fit and so-and-so is going to react and, whatever. And so, I'm not saying you have to go out and run around with your hair on fire or anything, but what I am saying is that you need to bring new thinking. So what buyers say is, if you're just going to reinforce what I already know, then it's not valuable to me. I already know this stuff. Tell me something I don't know. Help me think about what's my next step forward or what's coming that I need to really pay attention to, or why I should solve this problem when, hey, we've got a workaround. It seems to be okay. What's the big deal? I mean, how do we help them think differently in a way that is good for them, their careers, their companies, whatever it is? And so the whole thing for me is until you can understand their perspective and how they view it, like, why is it a priority for them? What else is going on? What else is it going to impact? At one company, when I was doing interviews, what we found was that the reason they were having trouble getting to decision was because of the other stuff implementing the solution would impact, right? It would change processes for other teams and departments as well. And it was just too heavy a lift, and they couldn't figure out how are we going to be successful implementing this thing. So it made the risk really high. And they said, we're going to just, do what we're doing because it's just too much. And so, one of the people I follow a lot is Hank Barnes from Gartner. He's done a ton of, enterprise customer persona work, which is basically ICP. And, he talks about the buying process. It's really interesting about how unprepared buyers are really to buy. And especially with this pushing everything back to self-serve, right? I'm going to get my own content. It's all over the place. I can find it myself. They don't know what they don't know. And so they don't know what they haven't learned, right? So, Hank talks a lot about the inability to buy just because they don't know what to do. They need guidance and help in evaluating and, understanding what does it really mean? And are we looking at the right things and asking the right questions and, all of that kind of stuff. And then my other favorite thing of late is the book, The Jolt Effect, that Matt Dixon and Ted McKenna wrote and came up with, we've focused a lot on FOMO, fear of missing out in the past as marketers. And the new thing now is FOMO, fear of messing up.
Oh, so
right? If I
true.
buy this, am I, tanking my career or,
Right.
hurting my company? Will it hurt my company in the long run and instead of helping it? And, it's, there's so much buyer regret out there,
Mm,
which also comes from Gartner, but, it's like 3/4 of buyers say, we're not sure we made the right decision after the fact, after they bought it.
hmm
So where are we messing up with that? And one of the things that excites me these days is what a great opportunity for marketing.
Right.
I mean, what a fun time to be a marketer. And, with economic things going on, retention is more important than ever. We've got to start looking across the entirety of the whole customer journey. How can we tell that story across all of it? And, keep customers engaged, keep net new buyers coming in the door, and, all of those things. And we have to also realize that those are different stories.
Mm.
A customer has already solved the initial problem you're talking to your net new buyers about. So what's the new value? What's the new story for them? What's their new status quo that we have to help them move beyond? And so I just find it all fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you always make the point it doesn't end at the sale. It's a continuum, right? And I think you use the term, you refer to it as a continuum. And so the job for marketers is bigger. The impact is also bigger. The need, is bigger. It's a more critical function for the organization, I think, than it's ever been, especially with the shift to digital. And I wanted to unpack first, one of the things that you mentioned around, the buyer driven experience or the self directed purchase experience, which is so, you know, um, accelerated by digital, certainly, because there's this, habits and behaviors we become accustomed to, as just consumers living our lives and interacting with the world, through sort of digital interfaces that bleed over into how we buy, how we research products and function that way. And so you've made a distinction, I think, between being buyer driven and what many brands like to tout, which is we're customer centric, right? We're a customer centric brand. So where do you see the difference between being buyer driven and having a buyer driven strategy and being customer centric happening?
I think buyer driven is really interesting because it's what I'm trying to do is get people away from product driven.
Mm,
And so what we tend to know best are our products. And so everything revolves around a product feature and how
mhm,
the product is going to fix your problem and all of this kind of stuff. But yet we're not relating to our buyers and helping them gain confidence, right? Helping
mhm,
them learn more and speaking to them on that human level,
mhm,
right? So one of the things that makes this also a great opportunity for marketing is with all the self-driven stuff, the self-serving content and all the rest of it, is they're pushing salespeople way back in the process.
mm.
And so marketing can no longer just sit there and say, okay, we got all these form fills. Now you have all these leads that you can
Right.
go after. We have to actually participate throughout the entirety of the process to keep them moving forward.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest challenges I see in all the reports is marketers are confused or challenged to create content for the different stages of the buying process.
Mm.
And mostly it's because we're not connecting the dots. It's like, what I teach in workshops is think about what's the first question that your buyer has. Let's just say they're looking at saying, why should I care about
Mhm.
solving this problem? What difference does it make to me?
Mhm.
And then you give them content that tells them that, and they read it and they think, that's interesting. Okay, so what about what's the
Mm.
next thing, right?
Mhm.
Given what you've just told them, and that takeaway that they have from it, now what does it open up for them to ask? And so one of the things that we don't think about is how context shifts, right? So before you know something, you don't have an opinion about it.
Mm.
Once you learn it, then you're able to say, well, that's really interesting, but now that makes me wonder about X. So
Mhm.
how do we build that chain where they continue on this journey of learning because we're answering questions that are relevant to them, giving them information that makes them think about new things they hadn't thought about before, and then opens up that space for them to say, okay, so how are companies like ours handling that problem?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Well, how long did it take them to implement, or what challenges did they face along the way, or whatever, however these things go together. But when I'm building personas, what I'm looking for are what are all the things they had to learn and know in order to move forward and make this buying decision. Who
Mm-hmm.
else had to be involved, all of those different things. And then you can use that insight to build that storyline in a connected way so that it makes sense. And it's not that, you've seen, I'm sure, that spaghetti chart of what the buying journey looks
Right.
like now and what have you. So it's not like they're just going to go through it linearly.
Right. So
But
throw
you
up your
have
hands.
exactly.
It's like,
But
right.
you have to build the story almost linearly because you need to make sure it all fits together. But the way that you link it and distribute it and whatever that allows people to step into the story and then figure out, what are the other pieces they're missing of it and connect those dots is important. And that seems to be a challenge for um, a lot of companies, but it's also driven by this executive thing like, well, what's our theme for Q2? And
Right.
it's like, okay, wait a minute. A quarter is 3 months, your buy cycle is 8 months, and now we're supposed to stop doing whatever we're doing and come up with a new theme and campaign for Q2. And we just got people interested in the beginning of the story. Now we need to keep telling the story,
Right.
but it seems to be an executive thing where it's like, okay, what's our new theme for Q2? And it's like, why do we need a new theme? Well, because everybody's bored with it because they've all seen it. Well, yeah, your buyers haven't. They
Right.
haven't gotten all the way through it, and so I find myself fighting these battles and, constantly trying to figure out how do we keep everybody focused on, we need to keep people engaged through the whole thing. Now that doesn't mean you can't put out new pieces of things that are
Right.
interesting, but tie them back into the story. How are we going to get people back into the story? So
Mm-hmm.
it's just a different way of thinking about it. It's not about the content. It's about the story, the process. What did buyers have to go through to be able to buy? And so
Right.
everything has to tie to that. And a lot of times it feels like it's check the box. Okay, we got a white paper out the door this quarter. Now we need a webinar and okay, a few blog posts and, let's run some ads and get some downloads. And why are you doing it?
Right.
What's the point?
Right.
So
We
my,
have to get back to purpose. And I am with you. I usually visualize this sort of story as, an expanding tree, but then you have the merchandising and the connecting of it out there in the experience that your buyer is having, which you don't have as much control of as maybe we once thought we did. But it functions as a network. It's a network effect. So it's 5 dimensional. They have to be able to come in and out, but if the content's there, it's there. And I think that gets back to the value of always on content creation, sustained storytelling, and evergreen content. Because to your point, it's getting so caught up in production, the production mindset. And, if we're not delivering a campaign, then what are we doing? Because we need to drive this like spike, right? But how can you instead build a sustainable growth pattern by compounding the effect of your content? And then maybe you have spikes in between, but you're not centralizing everything around spikes. But I think it's really interesting the way you frame the buyer experience. Reminds me of that internal versus external view. And when we were first doing website building, and everybody thought your homepage was the page, and then it turns out people are landing on article pages most of the time, because then it was like, the effective SEO, and that's their first experience. So where are you taking them from the article page? And we still see marketers struggling sort of with the concept because it's like, no, but we built the homepage to be the place that they land on. Well, you don't have that control over what they're going to use and which way they're going to use it. But I wanted to get back to that relevance point. And as you're building personas and doing workshops and working with brands, you mentioned before the language of the customer and how important that is. And so often we see people, you're in a workshop with marketers and maybe you're asking them to go through this thought exercise, which is really valuable in terms of asking the right questions, right? And thinking about things in the right framework. but they still might be making assumptions if they've never actually, lived in the shoes of those buyers. So it's somewhat of an exercise of imagination. So, and then other times people are relying on tools that promise the world, it's in, we've got buyer intent data. So you're going to be building data driven personas, and this is the silver bullet, and then you outsource to agencies who do all this really expensive, buyer persona work that's kind of based on third party research. And do you have to sit down and talk to customers? Are there tools? Are there tricks? Like, how do you approach this? Is it the hard work of doing customer interviews? Are there any shortcuts? How do you collect the language of the customer in a valid way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And quite frankly, I think what's given personas such a bad name is that nobody has taken the time to build them correctly. You can't buy your team a pizza and sit in the conference room and bang it out in an hour, So for me, it's always customer interviews, but there are so many other things that play a role. So for example, when I go in to start a persona project, one of the first things I want to do is talk to the whole marketing team and understand about their products or services, whatever it is. But then I want to talk to the sales team. I want to know, who do they want to talk to, right? Because if we don't get buy-in, it doesn't matter what we do. We've got to kind of all be in this together. So I want to talk to the sales team, and I want to get a feel for how well do they understand their buyers? Who are they trying to talk to? Are they successful getting in where they need to, or are they getting in and then having to move up or sideways? Are they, what's working, what's not working? Any particular conversations that stand out, that type of thing. And I want to get a real feel for, does everybody understand the ICP? Are we all going after the right people, and companies, customers? And so once all of that is done, or while all that's going on, deciding, well, once all that's done, then we say, okay, when I came into this project, you wanted to build these 3 personas, but now look at what I've learned in all these conversations. I've talked to your executives, your sales team, your marketing team, your product team, whatever. And really, we need to focus on, okay, we can keep this one, but these other 2 look more promising, because if marketing can't engage them, then what are we doing, right? If you can't just go after, just because sales wants to talk to the C-level, you can't just go after C-level, because they're not going to be the ones doing the research and evaluation most of the time, which means sales is going to have to go in through their team and then go up, right? And so, and it depends on what you're selling too. If it's really strategic, I take that back, but most things are not that strategic. And so, you have to understand all that. But then once we've decided, okay, these are the personas that make the most sense, now let's figure out, who can we talk to, right? And I want recent, and when I say recent, it's like within the last 18 months, because otherwise, even 18 months is challenging sometimes, because what happens is people move. So if the buyer has left the company and now I'm talking to whoever took over after the fact, they don't have the insights that I want from the buying journey, right? So, they have to be recent customers. And I also want it to be recent enough that they remember what they did, And so, and I only ask for 30 minutes. I've had to get really good at it, fast at it, because otherwise you can't get their time, right? And this is the most challenging part of the whole thing. Sometimes I can get it done in 6 weeks. Sometimes it takes 6 months by the time I can get them all scheduled and through the interview process. And so it's challenging. And the better relationships they have with our customers, the better off I am, and sometimes it helps that I'm a third party and not them asking for the interview. But it's really, I want to understand, okay, what happened on the day everything changed and you said, we have to solve this problem? What happened? What did it look like to you? Why did you decide it was so important to solve? What else is it tied to? And all of that. And then start walking me through, well, what'd you do? Who else was involved? What pushback did you get when you were trying to sell this internally? Who else do you have to convince? Who else did you consider and why did you rule them out? What did we do that made a difference, that had you buy from us? And, it's, I get all kinds of interesting answers, but one of the things I usually do is have several marketing team members from my clients sit in on these calls.
Mm.
And one time the VP of marketing actually sat in and she forgot to mute herself. And so the buyer said something, and all of a sudden you hear her gasp because it was so surprising and something they never would have considered. One of the reasons I have them sit in is because otherwise, when I come back with all the transcripts, notes, the report on everything, they don't want to believe it's true. I want them to hear the buyers say it because I already know it's going to be different. I've done so many of these, and once I've done all the internal calls, I know something, something's off a little bit.
Yeah.
But what you learn is really insightful. But the biggest problem that most companies have is they're like, okay, we got our personas, check the box, and then they go on and do whatever they're doing. They don't know how to apply the insights, and which is why I choose to build personas the way I build them, which actually gives them a roadmap to how to execute against what they learn from the persona. But we need to use the insights, not just gather them.
Right.
I mean, if they don't apply them, what good do they do?
Right.
So
I think your framework, people should check out because it's so different than how people sometimes traditionally think of personas in terms of a collection of demographics or, and maybe some firmographics, but you're really getting into the questions that need answering. And that's a direct line to what you need to be talking about and the content you need to be, creating to support the decision-making process as a brand and knock out competitors in that, work.
Yeah. And then once I'm done with all the interviews, I go do a ton of research, industry research, what have you. And I do a poll of maybe 100 people who could fit the persona. And I use a tool called Crystal Nose to look them up, which is kind of an archetype tool, and feed them through. And here, when I first started using it, it was really interesting. It's still interesting. But what I discovered was over the course of several projects, the majority of buyers that fit a persona will generally show up within the same archetype group. So Crystal Nose has 16 different archetypes in 4 different archetype groups. And most often, the majority, like if I pull 100, at least 75 of them will show up really tightly clustered in one archetype group. And the reason that matters is because what I'm looking for with personas, right? You can't interview the whole world and try to accommodate everybody. What I'm looking for is commonalities. What are the things that I can say that are going to resonate the most across the swath of people we need to engage that represent this persona? And the thing that's interesting with Crystal Nose is it talks about the archetype, and then it gives you a deep dive into what appeals to them, what kind, like it's, be direct and to the point, or, they always enjoy a little humor or, whatever, but it talks about what's engaging to these types of people. So it helps you from a tone, voice, and style perspective when you're writing your content, right? Because, a harmonizer who wants to, help everybody get along together is way different than a driver who's out there, let's get it done, and the same kind of content is not going to appeal to both of those, so it helps to really get grounded in, okay, what applies across, and then I'll just do some spot checking on people, do profile searches on LinkedIn for people who could also fit that persona and just check out, because Crystal Nose has a LinkedIn plugin. So I can just check it out to do some spot checking and just see, make sure I'm right. But I spend a lot of time trying to validate what I think I'm proving to make sure that I'm not making anything up or, leading people down the wrong road, because I want it to be really impactful. It's got to drive results or it's not good enough,
Yeah, absolutely. And those nuances in terms of language and how they like to consume content and what they kind of tone they're interested in. I feel like these are the new, if they haven't always been, maybe they have always been, but even more at the forefront now with so much content we're competing with. Relevance is the competitive, it's the thing you have to nail, or you're kind of dead in the water from a content marketing perspective. But I wanted to go back to something else you mentioned, which was related to the risk aversion factor. And you said something really important, I think, about having a sort of challenger or challenging point of view, being willing to plant a flag, and sort of a lot of B2B, especially enterprises, being really nervous about doing that. And so you end up with this whitewashed kind of we drive digital transformation language instead of really compelling thought leadership or really compelling content. So do you have some approaches or a framework that you use when you're training people or helping marketers develop a, here's what a distinctive point of view looks like? It's not the same as having a mission statement, that's not the same as a point of view. It's related, but this is a specific stance, how do you help someone learn how to do that?
Well, as in everything, it depends. But some of it depends on how established is the company that I'm working with, right? And, how tight are their brand guidelines? Where's the leeway, Or are they in the middle of a reorg? Like you mentioned the word digital transformation. I'm working with a client right now who's, customers are those involved in digital transformation. So they're open to bigger ideas and, more expansive stuff. But quite often it goes back to the origin story. What's the company in business for anyway? What big spark happened that, because a lot of my clients are tech, which means a lot of them are not, legacy companies that have been around for 100 years and whatever. Sure. And so, there was some spark that happened that said, okay, we've got a better mousetrap for this thing than anything we've seen anywhere else, and sometimes it comes from customers. And when you can prove, hey, our customers are really loving this thing and here's why, then it can help you get grounding for an approval, for an enthusiasm, for telling a story based on a point of view that resonates with customers. And so a lot of times it comes right out of the customer interviews that I do. And I say, a number of people said these things. What story can we build around that? Which makes our POV staying true to our company, but focused on our customers, which is, what a lot of people are challenged to do. But it also helps. I've been really lucky that I've had executive sponsors on these projects that have helped push through getting us allowed to do some of these things, because like I said, legal is the kiss of death. So it's like, they don't want to take a chance on anything that could come back to haunt them. And so, it's choosing your battles wisely, I think, but you're going to find more success if you base it in things your customers care about. The only way to find that out is talk to them, and it just is.
And so you're, helping sometimes brands discover that they have differentiators potentially, or value props that they may not even have realized that they had. You're discovering those through interviews. How often do you feel like, with the importance of that persona building work, how often do you recommend revisiting? How long do you think that you can, in your typical, B2B situation, kind of run on the same data?
Well, COVID changed everything. Let's just put it that way. It used to be that I thought we'd be good for about a year, maybe a little longer. Now it's kind of like quarterly, every half a year, whatever. But things change so fast, and the economy is up and down. We're, at war in a couple places of the world, and, all kinds of things are going on. But COVID really changed things drastically. So it's like, if you haven't updated in a couple of months, right after we were coming out of COVID, you don't know what's going on with your buyers because it's all shifting. Now we're looking at, are we going to have a recession? Are we not going to have a recession? Right. And how's the war going to impact things? In fact, I just heard on the news the other day that Given the war in Israel, we're probably going to see oil prices go through the roof again because of the Middle East impact. So how does that change things depending on what you're selling, where you're selling, who you're selling to? So I, kind of as a rule of thumb, I'm kind of like, let me talk to a customer once a month. Even when we're working on other stuff, let's just pick a customer. Let me, talk to somebody. And if I start hearing stuff that's different, let me talk to some more of them,
Yep.
but it's kind of to keep your finger on the pulse of, what's going on with people in your ICP, those kinds of things, checking in with customer success to see, what are you hearing? Are you hearing, things are likely to churn with this type of customer, given what's going on in the world or whatever, why or why not? And, those kinds of things, but keeping in touch with your sales team. We need feedback loops, and quite often marketing is operating in this silo over here, and sales is over there, and customer success is over here, and product says, oh, by the way, we're launching next Monday, and did you have a marketing program ready? It's like, okay, let's all try to work together, So, I've worked within companies where I had to introduce the demand gen team to the social media team because they didn't talk to each other. And I was like, how are we coordinating anything?
Right.
So, it's, and I just wrote a piece on alignment, and it was kind of like, what the heck? This has been a topic of conversation since I've been in this industry, which going on 23, 24 years now. And why can't we get that right? We're all after the same thing. So why do we have this aversion to working together? I don't get it.
Right.
So,
Everybody's protecting their territory. They've got different metrics. Your metrics aren't my metrics, so I don't need to, devalue other people's efforts.
Yeah, there was a time when I thought RevOps was going to solve this, and I have even more hope given GTM Partners, a new analyst firm focused on go-to-market strategy, bringing everything together and, helping companies move forward in lockstep, So it looks like it's coming around, but it just fascinates me that we sabotage ourselves in so many different ways.
Right. On our end, just with clients and brands we're interacting with, a lot of the triggers for, customers coming in and looking towards our services and strategy is because there's someone, or at least a cluster of people, where there's a real desire to break down the silos and achieve that kind of operational transformation, which is so critical. Now I just feel like AI is another big question mark, and the way everybody chooses to handle it or adopt it, that's starting to create little pockets. So now there's sort of infighting over, the use of AI or not. And like, it kind of throws everybody a few steps backwards. So I'm interested in your opinion on what the implications of things like ChatGPT are for even the buyer process, because that's changing.
Marketers can't have nice things. But I'm fascinated with it. Yeah. I'm horrified of this idea that marketers are going to use ChatGPT to generate content, because it is substandard beyond belief, in my opinion. And I just don't know how that's going to improve anything. And if all of us are now pumping out this content that is, when you read the stuff that ChatGPT generates, it's so high level. It's, it's like content that we generate today. It's talking to everybody. It's high level. It doesn't get anything specific. You're not sure if it made it up or not,
Right.
Yeah, and you should be questioning that, right. And but I'm seeing more and more companies that are creating platforms for marketing using AI in thoughtful ways with guardrails and, different things. In fact, there's a new company that's under seal right now because they haven't come out that I've gotten to see their platform, and it's really fascinating. And I'm the one, I don't know if you've seen the blog post that Andy Crestodina wrote about personas with AI, but he called me up and said, I know you have an opinion on this. And I did. And I'm like, how do you know it's true? I mean, how do you know that those are your buyers? I mean, if you ask ChatGPT, tell me what questions a CIO and a mid-size tech company is asking in buying a new CRM or something, how do you know that those are CIOs that you could tell to? I mean, where does that information come from? I mean, where did it come from? How do you validate any of it? And so that's the problems that I have with that. But I'm seeing some interesting applications. I'm seeing applications, for example, writer.io allows you to pull in your brand guidelines, allows you to an API to your data, your customer data, your content, everything else, and will run its, language model against your stuff in addition to other platforms, so that you have your flavor in there. And the brand guideline stuff is important. The inclusivity is important, right? So you're not having bias and what have you, which we all know AI does. And so I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities. I think if you just take blind faith and say, generate me a blog post, and you go and publish it, I think you're an idiot, quite frankly. But I think you're going to end up causing issues. Like in the very beginning when ChatGPT came out, and all of a sudden developers realized they had just exposed their IP and code to the large language model because they didn't think about pasting it in there. And what does that mean? It keeps it. Yeah, hello. So how do you, and now we're generating those security layers, right? That keeps your stuff and doesn't allow the model to learn it. But, do you know that's the model you're using? How are you protecting against that? How are you validating that what it's telling you is true when it doesn't give you any reference links or source or anything to what it says? And, there's all kinds of stories where I think my favorite one was an idiot lawyer who used ChatGPT, and it made up the casework that it gave him to prove his case.
Yes,
right?
I read
And
that
they
as
found
well.
out it was made up. And the lawyer didn't even check. I mean, you'd think a lawyer of all people would, be risk averse enough to check this stuff, but they didn't. And I mean, it's just kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, this could get serious quickly.
Right. It's kind of blown my mind how easily people, for the sake of convenience and shortcuts, will hand over the keys, will trust in a technology like that because it's artificial intelligence. I mean, it's designed to put, words together in a certain order, based on a predicted out. It's not even designed to really interpret context in a meaningful way. Right.
No, and it doesn't have any empathy. It can't think. It doesn't, So but I use it for brainstorming because quite often, it's better than sitting looking at a blank page for inspiration to strike. So I'll use it for brainstorming. I'll use it to edit a piece I've written.
Yep.
Just to see if it can make it better. And, things like that. But I don't use it to write things. I won't even have it write a first draft because I spend so much time having to fix it. It would have been faster just to write it in the first place and then let AI edit, to, make the readability score higher or whatever. Right. So, but it's interesting, but there are some interesting applications coming to market and some interesting things already being done. One of my clients, has added AI to their platform and, is working with Salesforce as a partner. So they have the trust layers and all that stuff, but they're now able to integrate the data from their platform across the entire customer journey to improve the customer, cash to care journey, right? So improving the whole customer life cycle. And, so it's interesting, the things that can be done, but it's not without its flaws.
Right. Yeah, we've been successful in implementing it in our product, but from an atomization standpoint. So always human generated content is the anchor. But when it comes to reformatting and repurposing, if you're working from the source material, and then you've got it's ingested, your brand editorial guidelines, calibrated for the right tone, calibrated for style. It gets really granular in terms of the prompt architecture, but you can do a good job of generating iterative assets more quickly, which I think feeds that sort of connected content strategy that most people want. It definitely helps speed to market and feeding channels, not that should be the overall objective, but so that you're getting a little bit more out of, everything that you're producing.
Yeah,
But
and I have this big inquiry. I wrote a piece a while back about what happens when your buyers start using ChatGPT. And so, really, if a lot of people are saying ChatGPT might replace search, and so what happens if your buyer goes out to ChatGPT and says, I need to replace my ERP system. What should I know? Or whatever. If you're an ERP vendor, are you going to come up? If they say, tell me the top 10 ERP vendors, or who should I consider given my company is 500 people and this much money in revenue and, whatever parameters they give it,
right.
And a lot of us are having to learn, well, what does it mean to write a good prompt? Garbage in, garbage out. So, how developed do your prompts have to be? But, I even had fun. I went out there and searched on myself as a published author who has, podcasts and webinars and speaking stuff and a website and, whatever. And it did a pretty good job of summarizing me. And thankfully, I came back in the, top 20 list of B2B content marketing strategies because I was curious. But, it's kind of like there's this whole discussion going on about how we don't want the LLMs to learn our stuff. But yet again,
we want to show up.
There be a strategy in place to where we are making sure that the right stuff gets picked up by the AI so that when our buyers are asking questions, we show up. There's that to think about. And what does that mean? And what would a strategy for that look like? And I don't have the answers to all of those things, but I'm playing with them because it's like, it's not going to go backwards. We can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Right.
So as it gets better and better, how would we feed it what we want it to have that would be relevant to our buyers that would show up when they ask questions of it?
Right.
In relation. So what does that look like? And, I don't know the answers, but it's one of the things I've been pondering a lot lately.
I love pondering that. It's a whole nother layer of even, revisiting the start of search. And are people prompting the same way that they search? We feel like people feel like they got kind of, voice to text and voice search figured out and long tail. And, this could be completely different. It could be a completely different type of habit and behavior that people develop. So fascinating to think about. I know I've got you over time, but I was hoping I could keep you for just another second for a speed round, which is sort of, our version of the Actors Studio final questions list, where it's just off the top of your head. I'm going to ask you 5 questions. Yes, just because it's Halloween. Yeah, so you can have spooky answers. But first question, as a marketer, what keeps you up at night?
Worrying about what it takes to be relevant.
It should. And what keeps you going?
Oh, the fun of learning new stuff about buyers and being able to engage them. Yeah.
What marketing term, I feel like you're going to have good answers for these. What marketing term do you love?
Well, I'm not sure it's a marketing term, but my favorite right now is experience.
What marketing term do you hate?
Oh, lead gen. It's like anybody who fills out a form. Yeah, they're a lead. Go after them.
Yes. And then lead gen, it sort of just like cheapens the whole process, right? What emoji best describes the current state of marketing?
Oh, I'm not a very big emoji person. Is there one like with hair on fire? And
I think so. There's definitely one where the top is being blown, the head's being blown off. Yeah. It's just a collective boom. And then, this is a little bit of a trick question, but quality or quantity?
Oh, quality every day of the week.
Quality, quality, quality. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Ardath, for joining me on the podcast today. Really appreciate it. I hope to have you back again so we can dive even deeper into, what's going on with persona development and talk about some of the developments maybe, that'll inevitably come out in the next 3 months related to ChatGPT and AI. But it's been such a pleasure talking with you. So thanks for lending your insights to the show.
Well, absolutely. And thanks for having me. And anytime. I love these kinds of conversations. So fun.
Wonderful. Me too. This is the best part of my day. Now I get to go back to learning more about my buyers.
There you go.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Content Disrupted, brought to you by Skyward. Stay up to date on the latest ideas and insights in brand building and content marketing by visiting our website at skyward.com. Join us for our next episode, where we'll continue to challenge marketing norms and inspire you with fresh strategies for growing business through brand storytelling. See you there.